So here we go. Now we're going to find out what was behind the door when they opened it. Chapter 5, Coach's Conundrum. Maybe those mouth monsters in the moat aren't so bad, Carl thought. The figure in the doorway had 2 heads, and it was 3 times as tall as Carl. Check it out, Carl, Patsy whispered. He followed her gaze to the monster's feet. It was wearing footy pajamas with patterns of baseballs. You threw rocks at our house, one of the heads yelled. Its face was angry and topped with a crew cut, a military cut. The other head grinned. Hey there, gang. Its ponytail bobbed around as it nodded at them. What's up? The angry head snapped around to glare at the grinning one. What are you doing? What are you doing here? Rolling his eyes, the smiling head said, Chill, bro. Then he turned to the Scream team. I'm Virgil, Conundrum. And this cranky pants is my brother, Wyatt. Carl had only seen pictures of the Conundrum heads, not their body. He hadn't known they were a 2-headed monster. And from the looks on his teammates' faces, neither had they. Sorry my brother's being totally uncool, Virgil said. We haven't seen guests or each other in 5 years. He's a little rusty in the welcome department. You haven't seen your brother for 5 years? Patsy asked. She took off an ear and looked at it to make sure there wasn't any clogged wax in it. Wyatt huffed impatiently. The mansion is split down the middle. Virgil stays on her side, I stay on mine. Carl wondered how that would work. And all visitors stay away, Wyatt added and tried to close the door. Virgil held it open. As the brothers pushed back and forth on the door, Virgil asked Carl, So what can we do for you? You kids selling some Oregon cookies or something? You got any spleen mint? That's my favorite. And you know what? I also really like chocolate heart. Carl shook his head. My friends and I are starting a JC Monster League team. We're the Scream team, and we need a coach. Or coaches. That's an awesome idea, Virgil said. You're different kinds of monsters, Wyatt said. You can't start a junior club team. Besides, our coaching days are over. Too many spies. Spies? JZ asked. Years ago, we coached different teams, Wyatt answered. But somehow my brother knew all of the secret plays and starting lineups, Virgil said. And what's hilarious is somehow Wyatt knew mine, too. You share the same body, right? JD asked. Yes, Wyatt said. And your point is? Virgil said. Anyways, I'd love to check out your team. If I like what I see, I'll coach you. This could be spectacular. Wyatt struggled harder to close the door. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going back upstairs to reorganize my blister collection. With a wink, Virgil leaned his head closer to Carl and his friends. You are, he said in a loud fake whisper. Your friends are having a party and we're invited? Carl had no idea what he was talking about, but he winked back and nodded. Wyatt stopped trying to close the door. Well, he said, maybe I can go. I guess I can organize my blisters later. Yes, Carl said, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Virgil said, patting his shoulder. I'll make a final decision after I check out your team. The Conundrums put on a sweatsuit and followed the kid monsters back across the bog. When they arrived, it was clear the rest of the Scream team was sick of Maxwell. He was stuck in the branches of a dead tree, looking like an exploded roll of toilet paper. Carl and JD helped him down. Is this your idea of party decorations? Wyatt sniffed. A mummy in a tree? Chill, bro, Virgil said. He pulled out a baseball from a pocket of his sweatpants. Let's see what these monsters have to offer. Carl clapped his paws together. We'll show you what we got. We will? Patsy asked. I'd like to see that, too. Carl asked the Conundrums to hit fly balls to the outfield. The monsters took turns catching them. Virgil called, "Chatter! Monsters! Talking is half the battle." "You should know about talking," Wyatt said. "That's all you do." "I talk too much?" Virgil laughed. "You're the one who keeps telling people I'm adopted." Carl took his turn in the outfield. When the ball rocketed toward him, he stuck out his arm, and the ball landed in his glove and bounced right out. Wolfsbane! He'd forgotten to close his glove. His face stung with embarrassment. Carl watched the others take their turns. One hit zinged toward Beck and Bolt. "You got it, Bolt?" Beck asked. "Got what?" Bolt asked, looking at Beck as if he was about to be a present. The ball sailed into his head. Still, Carl held out hope the Conundrums would coach them. After all, Virgil was smiling ear to ear when he called them back to gather around. "My goodness, that was..." Virgil burbled cheerfully. "Just awful." Wyatt finished for him. "Horrible, really." "You call that party entertainment? That's the worst party ever. I mean, where's the cake?" "But you'll coach us, won't you?" Carl asked, his heart sinking. "Well, I would," Virgil started. "Coach you?" Wyatt shouted. "So there's no party? I should have known this was a trick." He spun the Conundrum's body around so it was headed back to the mansion, and Virgil dragged one leg, but Wyatt kept plowing ahead. So here's the Conundrums. They're conjointed twins, so they have one body with two heads. And then here we have the picture of Wyatt dragging Virgil home, and Virgil dragging his leg, and all of the other monsters. So, Carl and Patsy, Maxwell. "I'm not coming out of retirement for this," Wyatt called over his shoulder, "and stay off our land." The brothers staggered away, bickering over who was taller, and the monsters watched them go. "Wow," JD said. "My parents were right. The Conundrums are scary." "I need to go back to my coffin," Dennis said, tears mixing with the drool on his chin. "Is practice over?" "You got it, Bat Boy," Maxwell said dismally. "And so is this scream team." Carl, clenching his fist, shook his head. "No way!" "Come on, Carl, you heard the coaches," Patsy said. "They said we're horrible." "It's not over," he said firmly. "Not until we are all playing on real teams again." Chapter 6, Monster Rally. 3 days later, the night of the Monster Rally arrived. All of the JC Monster League teams would be introduced. Even if they didn't have a coach, Carl was determined the Scream team would be at that rally. JD, Dennis, and Maxwell came over to Carl's house to prepare. He met them in the bushes in front and then snuck them around to his tree fort in the backyard. Dennis was out of breath from climbing up the ladder in the fort. He looked around with wide eyes. "Wow, it's like a baseball museum in here." A big poster of Wolfenstein hitting a home run was taped to one wall. In a small jar was the last tiny bit of hot dog Carl had saved from the glass game he went to last year. There was a piece of grass at the stadium's infield. Carl liked to open the jars just to get a whiff of the ballpark. JD dropped the roll of fabric he lugged up the ladder. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack. "Shh," Carl said. "My dad's in the house. He'll hear you." "So?" JD asked. "I haven't told him about not making the werewolves." "What? Why not?" "There's no reason to tell my dad, right?" Carl said, sliding the hot dog jar behind a box. "We still might be able to win a game in 2 days. Then Coach Powers and the other coaches will see how good we are and put us back on the real teams, right?" Carl knew that this sounded pretty nuts, but it was his only chance to be on the werewolves. "I guess," JD said, sounding a little doubtful. To change the subject, he pointed at the fabric. "I found this burlap to make uniforms. It was in the trash, at the cemetery." Dennis felt the material. "That's coffin lining." "I'll handle this," Maxwell announced. "I know how clothes should fit. I mean, look at me." He gestured at the sweaty, droopy strips of cloth around his body. The others thought he was kidding and laughed, but Maxwell was serious, and the other monsters knew they didn't know how to sew. With no scissors in the fort, they used Dennis's fangs to cut the fabric and thread. It was a little soggy, but effective. To save time, Maxwell said, let's just put our initials on the back of each the back of each uniform and a number. I'm going with number 9, Carl said, stitching a circle of the 9 in the fabric, just like Wolfenstein. Dennis bit off the last thread just in time. They tossed the uniforms in a bag and rushed on their bikes to the stadium for the monster rally. Hundreds of kid monsters packed the stands, sitting together with their teams. A stage had been set up in the middle of the baseball diamond. The team's coaches and the president of the JC Monster League sat in a row of chairs behind the microphone. The rest of the Scream team was hiding behind a curtain in the back corner of the stage. Is everything set? Carl asked, handing out the uniforms in the bag, putting on his own. Just completing. Operation Name on List Now. She waved her handless arm toward the stage. Her hand was crawling up the side of the podium. And at the top, it grabbed a pen and scribbled the team's name at the top of the list. Perfect timing. Dr. Neuron walked to the podium. The place went crazy. He raised a tentacle for silence. Welcome, new teams of the JC Monster League, Dr. Neuron said, and his voice echoed throughout the stadium. You carry on a proud tradition that includes Octopod, Wolfenstein, and Pussack. Tonight, we usher you into the pack. As I read out your team name, please come on stage. He cleared his throat. And now, for our first team, he squinted at the page. What is this? Is this some kind of joke? Dr. Neuron looked at the list again and then said, more like a question, the Scream team? There was a sharp whine of the microphone. Monsters winced. Ooh. And a few howled in pain. With his teammates following, Carl burst from behind the curtain and trotted out on the stage. He was excited for Coach Powers to see him in his uniform. As the Scream team formed a line at the front of the stage, he waited for applause, but instead, BAM! Laughter roared at them from the audience. Dennis popped into a bat. JD turned bright red. Dream team? A mummy shouted. Oh, like in your dreams, team. Or a bad dream team. No, it's Scream team, a Swamp Thing sneered. Like scream for help because they're a bunch of losers. A ghost snickered. Well, at least that poodle kid got it right. He's a 0. It's the number 9, Carl called and looked at his back. Uh-oh, it was a 0. He'd forgotten to sew the tail on the circle to make it a 9. Suddenly, Carl saw his teammates' uniforms for what they were. Burlap sacks with openings for heads and arms. They looked ridiculous. It wasn't just Carl who was a target. The Bigfoots slid the rally programs on the end of their toes and acted like they had Beck's flipper feet. The blobs were quivering at Eric, and something about it was making him roll slowly back. Coach Powers stormed over from the group of coaches. Have you gone nuts, Carl? We're a team, Carl stammered. We're the Scream team. We tried. Coach Powers crooked eyebrow at him. If you're a team, where's your coach? We tried getting 2 coaches, but one of them, Carl started to say. Coach Powers held up a paw. You know how I feel about excuses, Carl. Now please, leave the stage and take these other monsters with you. Patsy turned to the president of the JCML. Dr. Neuron, can you help us, please? I'm sorry, Dr. Neuron said, but he didn't sound like it. The rules specifically say you need a coach. With the crowd still hurling insults and laughter, the Scream team started off the stage. Carl hesitated and Dr. Neuron said firmly, You heard me. No coach, no team. Then it's a good thing we're here, a voice said. Carl's heart leapt. It was Virgil Conundrum. Shock swept through the crowd as Wyatt and Virgil jogged up the steps and strode to the middle of the stage. Wyatt glared at the audience until they quieted. Then he turned to Carl and his friends. Where are you monsters going? Come back up here and line up. When they were in place at the front of the stage, Virgil announced, We are the coaches of the Scream Team. The crowd gasped, and there was a bit of scattered laughter. Dr. Neuron huddled with Coach Powers and the other coaches. One of them had the JCML rulebook and flipped through it frantically. Finally, Dr. Neuron walked back to the podium. Fine, he said quietly. The Scream Team. No one clapped. All right, get moving. Next we have the Swamp Things. The stadium cheered and the Scream Team hustled backstage. Way to go, team, Virgil said, and shared a few high fives. Changed your mind? What changed your mind? Carl asked Wyatt. You think we're really good players after all, don't you? No, Wyatt said, with a very stern shake of the head. It's because you're really, really bad, and it's gonna be hilarious to watch. I coached the best in the game. Now I'll coach the worst. Wyatt's mean. We'll have to find out how it goes with the coaches and the Scream Team next.